Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our storage, Stor Simple and Azure webinar. My name is David Bloxham, the Marketing Manager at SoftwareONE. Joined today by Jeremy Lloyd, one of our Solution Architects here at SoftwareONE. Before we go into today's session, just a few housekeeping rules. You may have noticed as you entered the call, you've all been set on mute. It's to ensure that the sound quality remains at an optimum. But we do encourage any questions that you have as Jeremy goes through today's session. So please feel free to use the chat box facility or the question box, and we'll have time at the end for a bit of a Q&A. So we do encourage interaction and engagement, so please send us your questions. So before I hand over to Jeremy, just a brief overview of SoftwareONE. So there's a few names on the call who are new to SoftwareONE. So SoftwareONE, we're a global IT and services solutions company, very much built our business around software licensing, software asset management, and now building up a technical services division with consulting services. We're Microsoft's global partner, worldwide partner of the year for Azure, and it's sort of credibility that we're building up over time, and I'm certain that Jeremy's session today will help show and demonstrate our technical prowess as we're building that side of the company. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jeremy.
Great, thanks David. Hi everybody, so thanks for joining the session today. So to start with, we've got just a little brief agenda here. So we're just going to look at some Azure storage and what those capabilities are right now. Then we're going to have a look at just a quick chat about storage challenges that present you in your current infrastructures. And then we're going to have a bit of an in-depth look around the 8000 series, the Stor Simple 8000 series appliance, and how that can radically change your storage infrastructure and lower your total cost of ownership. So without further ado, let's just dive in. So the Azure Azure storage comes in various different guises at the moment. You've got your blob storage, disk storage, tables, queues, and files. And the blob storage is the one that's most commonly used. That's the binary large objects that you can store. You've got a sorry, that's correct. In there, you've got a REST API where you can interact with that from command lines. You've got big data storage that you would be able to put on there. And you can put backups and any other data, file data, documents and things like that can be stored in the blob storage. Disks are basically storage for virtual machines, so if you have a virtual machine running in Azure, you can attach an additional disk, and that disk is an underlying VHD format. They don't use the VHDX format. And that actually sits on underlying blob storage as well, even though it's presented to your virtual machine as a disk. Table storage is basically a no SQL cloud store, so it's giving you the ability to sort of get away from using just SQL and the limitations around SQL. It'll give you the ability to do the auto load balance partitions, which is one of the biggest limitations around the SQL aspect at the moment. Queues are basically a reliable messaging system, so it provides a low latency, high throughput messaging. You can have, typically for web roles, if you've got front-facing websites in Azure, you would use messaging queues to sort of make sure that your users are being served in an efficient manner. And finally, files are basically an SMB 2.1 shares, so it's literally what we know and love from the SMB protocol that you can now use in Azure. So some of the other bits there, so the Azure storage is highly durable and massively scalable, and when we look at that massive scale, when we're talking about sort of I've got the statistic there, 3.5 million requests per second on average. You know, all of the Office 365 platform is running on Azure storage. Bing search engine is, despite people may love it or hate it, but that's using Azure storage, as well as all of the Xbox Live, all of that gaming side these days, with more of those online games becoming more prevalent in basically the cloud storage space. So with regards to the cost modeling for the storage, you only pay for what you use. So although those of you that are using Azure at the moment will know that there are different ways to commit those costs to the Azure platform, by the upfront cost or via a pay-as-you-go model. Ultimately, the storage that you're utilizing, you will only be paying for what you're actually using. So everything in the Azure storage, all of the blobs, disks, tables, queues, and files that I've mentioned are all openly accessible via REST APIs for any developers that may be on the call and want to interact with their application stacks. There is a growing, massively growing client libraries and tools. There's a big community out there that's sort of creating tools, anything from the Azure Storage Explorers to some SDKs out there to help you sort of better interact with the storage. And if you want to check any of those out, I'd advise getting on NuGet, N-U-G-E-T, and having a look at some of the packages that you can actually download from there. So moving on to something that's just recently been announced, and that is the premium storage. So this is basically providing us with very low latency SSD storage with sort of not a guarantee, but it's a very predictable I/O throughput. So it's really, really suitable now for those database workloads. Previously, Microsoft were getting some pushback on the I/O throughputs from their sort of A series virtual machines. So now they've introduced the D series. So for any of you that do have Azure and you've seen the D series pop up there, that's what they are. So they are more expensive, but they are premium virtual machines, and they're utilizing this underlying premium storage. And I won't go through all those statistics there on what the storage is capable of, but some of the impressive ones there has been able to stripe up to 32 disks for a total of 32 terabytes and more than 50,000 IOPS. A little screen print there showing the IOPS there at actually 65,000, so hence the more than. So if we dive into Stor Simple, and first of all we'll just have a look at some of those challenges that your organizations are facing today. So surveys show that on average your data growth is around 40% year on year. That increase in data and storage infrastructure behind supporting the data growth is very time consuming and very expensive, not to mention adding additional complexities as you're having to add in the additional, I've got something here, as you're having to add in the additional storage arrays to cater for this data growth. So let's take a quick look. Sorry, just click on the next slide. Okay, so what does your current infrastructure look like today? So on the left-hand side, this is what a typical sort of enterprise-grade storage infrastructure would look like. You've got your primary storage, your NetApps, you've got your archival storage, any sort of email that you're siphoning off to archive. You've got your disk-based backups, any remote replication there that you've got going off-site, and your tape backups. So what the Stor Simple 8000 series appliance is basically aiming to achieve is to reduce all of that to a single box and using Azure for the remaining storage. By doing that, what they're hoping you can do is lower your storage costs, manage your data growth in a more proficient way, and also massively simplify data protection and disaster recovery. So let's just have a quick look at some of the statistics from the 8000 models. So there's two models there. We've got the 8100 series and the 8600. They have a total usable capacity there of obviously 15 terabytes and 40 for the 8600. Now, typically with storage, when they've got the disks in your say your NetApp filers, for example, what you have for the disks and what you can actually use are two very different figures due to RAIDing that needs to obviously take place there for your resiliency. The Stor Simple device doesn't actually use RAID. Instead, it uses something called a metadata map, which we'll actually go through a little bit later on. But what that means is it makes much more effective use of the physical disk that it's got there. The device also performs deduplication and compression, hence the larger effective local capacity. And the 8000 series does now have 10 gig NICs in it as well. So this is just a look at the back of the device, and obviously some of the fault tolerance statistics that are on the right hand side there around what you can actually get out of this box. So it's obviously got redundant power supplies, it's any storage must. It also has dual controllers, and the dual controllers are in an active passive capacity. So that gives you the ability to make sure that should a controller fail, the other controller will seamlessly become active, therefore interruption should be negated. Okay, so let's have a quick look at our locally redundant and geo-redundant storage. I'm just going to expand this slide out because there's a few bits of information on here. Okay, so for the cloud tier of solutions that you have, the options for locally redundant and geo-redundant storage. So when I say the cloud tier, that is the Azure storage. So that's data that's now moved off of the Stor Simple appliance and into the cloud. And I'll go through and explain how that sort of happens later on. But once you've got that data in the cloud, what you can have is locally redundant means all your data will reside in a single Azure data center. So the two closest ones to us are in Dublin, which is the North Europe, or Amsterdam, which is West Europe. There will be 3 copies of that data in those that Azure data center as your primary data center location, which already some customers give us feedback saying 3 copies of the data is actually better than they would have with their current scenarios. However, you also get geo-redundancy, which is basically provides an asynchronous replication to another Azure data center, whereby you get another 3 copies of your data. That's showing the second location there with the 3 thumbprints there. For standard blob storage, what we talked about earlier, you'd actually be paying extra for geo-redundant storage. However, under the SKU for Stor Simple, you get geo-redundancy as part of that package. So that's you basically have up to 6 copies of your data in Azure. So Azure, the Stor Simple appliance, it works on tiering. It's tiered storage. This tiering that I'll explain here applies to all levels of the storage. We'll have a look at the levels of the storage in a second. So to start with, you get the device, the tier is empty. As you start onboarding data onto that device, it starts obviously using up that space. When the data gets to the high threshold or just above the high threshold, it will basically remove that data and it will migrate that off down to the low threshold, and the additional data from the low threshold to above the high threshold will actually be put into Azure, removing you back down to your low threshold. So that way, what it's giving you the ability to cater for there is a large amount of data that may suddenly be migrated onto the appliance. That way, no one tier is ever running above about 80%. I think that statistic is there to give you that flexibility. Any data, once it's over that 80%, will be the oldest data will be moved into the next tier. And we'll have a little look at that actually in the next slide, so I won't explain that, but keep that in your head there for a second. So what we have, the Stor Simple solution operates on 2 physical tiers, with the 3rd tier obviously being actually in Azure. So the linear tier is basically looking at just blocks. So it works on a standard 64K block. It doesn't care about the files or anything like that. So treat each of these letters up here as a 64K block. Now when I'm actively working on documents and my users are accessing files from SharePoint or from their network drives, they would see basically pointers to, they're seeing metadata pointers to the location on the physical Stor Simple appliance. The Stor Simple appliance, as I say, just reads them as blocks. So when that data is being built up, so two documents of a similar nature are loaded onto the SSD layer, they'll get deduplicated because the SSD has deduplication that it takes care of. When that SSD meets the automatic tiering high threshold, which we looked at in the previous slide, that means my data will actually move to the next layer down. So it isn't done. A lot of people ask me and say, oh, is it done on a certain amount of time, like after 12 months I want it to move to the cloud? It's not done on that basis. It's governed by when the tier above it is full, the oldest data will move down to the next lowest tier. So we can see C, D, and E have moved down there into the SAS tier. Now they've gone from being deduplicated, they've now got the deduplication applied from the previous tier, but they're also compressed now. Now, when D isn't being used at all and E isn't being used at all, and the SAS layer is completely full, they'll actually go to the cloud. So they'll go to the Azure storage. When they go to the Azure storage, they're actually fully encrypted as well. Now, when I want to get a file back, a user clicks on an old file, say a personal development review that's over 12 months old or 12 months old, and they click on that because they need to update that for the next review. That would be unencrypted, uncompressed, and put back into the SSD layer for the user to access. Okay, so briefly we spoke about simplified management. Now the reason why it's simplified management is basically the StorSimple 8000 series can integrate with the Azure portal. So if you already have a subscription to Azure, you're actually able to register multiple physical appliances or virtual appliances, we'll talk about them in a second, to your StorSimple manager. And it's a very simple process to actually register the device there. Around getting the device registration key and an encryption key. You add those into your StorSimple manager in the Azure portal, and you have the ability to utilize the device, create volume containers and volumes. So, as I said, what you're able to do is create volume containers. So once you've got your StorSimple appliance or your multiple appliances linked to your Azure account, you can just make out in the background there of the standard Azure portal. We basically create a volume container. So a volume container requires a name, and it requires you to pick the specific storage account. You could have multiple storage accounts here, so you can pick the specific storage account you want. And obviously you need to provide your own storage encryption key. Okay, so let's have a little look at some of the flexibility that gives you around these volume containers. So this is just a typical sort of use case. We've got the one storage account there that we've just obviously pointed our container to, and we've got two different containers here. They're completely isolated and have different encryption keys. So where that can be really useful is when you have two different teams that look after or that potentially could look after the storage for their respective applications. So on the right hand side we've got SharePoint, and that's got 3 volumes that have been created for SharePoint to use with the encryption key. And then on the other side we've got just a standard file container, and that's obviously got again those 3 volumes associated to it. So the possibilities there are endless on what you could isolate those volume containers if that's what you need to do. So to back up the device, we can perform local snapshots, which are pointers to the data and kept locally on the appliance, or we can perform cloud snapshots of volumes inside a volume container. And we have complete flexibility around what we decide to do around when it's daily or weekly or monthly for those individual volumes inside a volume container. This puts the entire volume into Azure, giving you additional redundancy in a disaster scenario if you're using the cloud snapshots. And we'll have a little talk about that as well later on. So the StorSimple Virtual Appliance, I mentioned it briefly earlier. So if I've taken a cloud snapshot, as I just spoke about, and I've snapped an entire volume container or individual volumes within a container, that does put a copy of all of the data into Azure. I have a slide later on that goes a little bit further into that. But if you take that, what I now have the ability to use is a Stor Simple Virtual Appliance. What that enables me to do is build a virtual machine in Azure, connect the virtual appliance to an iSCSI target, and then what I can do is basically get access to those cloud snapshots instantly to be able to restore data. There's no moving around of data. The data is already in a cloud snapshot in Azure, so it's very quick and efficient for me to get to restore that data to a VM in Azure. And one other thing actually on that, the virtual machine and the Stor Simple Virtual Appliance, they must be on a virtual network in Azure. So the virtual network in Azure gives you the ability to have your own private address range. They do need that for communication. Okay, so I have briefly spoken about this bit already actually. So as it says there, local snapshots are kept on the physical appliance itself, and a cloud snapshot is sent to Azure. You've got there the ability, as I said, great flexibility around when you do the frequency, whether it's daily, weekly or monthly, and you can't do the local weekly snapshots. So local has to be daily, or for cloud it has to be weekly and monthly, or it could be daily as well. So they're just basically wanting you to make the best efficient use of the storage you've got on premises there. So they don't want you to fill up your SSD and SAS arrays with the snapshots, the local snapshots. Okay, so if we just have a little look at how a local snapshot would work actually. So as I mentioned, it treats, the device treats everything as the blocks of data. So if we treat A, B and C as individual sort of blocks there, when I change something when I've made a snapshot and I've changed something in A sort of star will appear, well sorry, A star is there, and A will appear in the actual snapshot. When I take another snapshot, A won't be in there because it's already in my first snapshot, but something's changed on E, so that now will be in that second snapshot. And likewise, when I've changed something again, I've got C and F. They should actually be in snapshot 3, but they've gone to the wrong slide. That's my misconfiguration there, sorry. So, as I said, I'd talk more around the capabilities of what a cloud snapshot can do. So, basically, the first cloud snapshot that you take will take a copy of all of your data from your SSD and your SAS and put that into Azure. The next cloud snapshot, let's just expand that out, there we go. The next cloud snapshot will only look at new blocks and the new metadata and put that into Azure. It's basically an incremental backup. So something's changed in the SAS, there it is there, moving over, and it will move that particular block into that incremental backup. And with the new metadata map, with my pointers to that record there. So what we can do there is, bear with me, what we were able to do is we can basically take that cloud snapshot. So say I have a disaster on my on-premises Stor Simple box, and I need to swap that out with a new box. What I'm able to do is re-register the new device in my Azure portal. It takes the same device encryption key and the same registration key, and that way I have access to all of my data stored in my Azure storage from my cloud snapshot. So that's my entire snapshot of data that I've got in the cloud there. What I can then do is I can just load the metadata map onto my new Stor Simple appliance. Once I've loaded that metadata map on there, users can still access their data because the user just has a pointer record to that data. So they don't care where the data is. They don't need to know if it's on SSD or SAS. In that DR scenario, the fact is the data is visible to the user. The user clicks their finance document that they need to pull, that they need to open. Because none of that data resides on premise at the moment in your new Azure Stor Simple appliance, it will literally unencrypt that from Azure, put it back through the decompression and put it back into the SSD layer. So all of the user's data will just filter back through into SSD, and then over time again it's going to go back into the SAS and back into the cloud as it becomes stale. So what that means is if you've got 15 terabytes of data in Azure and a DR, you have a disaster scenario, you don't need to worry about recovering all of that data. Only the active data set is going to be filtered through, and users aren't going to be opening 50, 60 documents instantly, so it will filter through gradually. But granted, there are concerns you would need to have around your internet pipes there and redundancy of internet pipes, given how critical it would be with your data being recovered from the cloud. Okay, so what you also have is the StorSimple Snapshot Manager. So the StorSimple Snapshot Manager is just an MMC snapping, which allows you to integrate with Volume Shadow service and use SQL snapshots and Hyper-V snapshots. So it's a very useful additional tool to have there to manage your local policy, your local snapshots there. Okay, so I jumped ahead of myself a little bit on that one, and I've briefly explained around this one where we have a secondary appliance there, a second StorSimple box that we can recover from. Likewise, we could use the StorSimple Virtual Appliance to get access to those cloud snapshots and really get that data restored in a quick and efficient manner. Okay, this one just highlights that we've lost the StorSimple appliance in Datacenter 1. Datacenter 2 has got that second appliance, and what we're able to do there is obviously restore that data back. This is actually using the virtual appliance, so treat that virtual appliance as like a little gateway into that storage that you've got in Azure, and it gives you that great ability to utilize existing infrastructure as a service capabilities of the Azure platform, and obviously just get very quick access to that data, because once it's in Azure, the data is not moving. So if it is a large volume container or a large volume that you need to restore because a users or a department have lost a certain amount of documents or being audited, you can very, very quickly expose that. So really, that's pretty much. We've got the Azure and StorSimple offers as well. So currently, there's some very compelling offers to take on board the StorSimple appliance. What you basically are able to do is make use of the 7000 series has got an offer, and the 8000 series have got offers. What you're able to do is have an upfront commit of those prices there, so 60,000 or 120 for the 7000 series. And what that means is you get the appliance in effect for free, and it's giving you $60,000 or $120,000 of credit for Azure storage. So the more you utilize the appliance, the more you're going to get your better value for money there. And it also includes the gold support for year one. And the gold support is basically a maintenance contract for the physical appliance like you would have with any of your current storage. We've also got 8000 series offers as well, and it's a similar thing. So you upfront commit the $75,000 or the $150,000, and you get access to the Azure credits, so you get that storage capacity for that first year. So at the moment, those offers are due to expire, I believe, on the 31st of December this year. So it's good to strike while the iron's hot if this is going to be a technology that's of use to you. So, wrapping that up, are there any questions from anybody? If you can sort of post those away.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. So I'll use this opportunity now to open the floor to everyone on the call to send us your questions if you have any. Please use the chat box facility. That should be available on your panel. So let me just open up the questions and just see if we have any available. So you let off the hook here, Jeremy. It doesn't appear to be. Oh, yeah, there's one. Do apologise. Okay. Let me just bring that out so I can read it. Let me just pop that open. So the question is, what can or can't be stored on StorSimple, e.g. SQL databases, VM virtual disks, VM storage?
Yeah, great question. So The 7000 series I would just be using for my file data. I'd be using it for those unstructured data sets. When it comes to the 8000 series, it is now supporting SQL databases. It does support Hyper-V and VMware virtual machines as well. So you definitely can use it for those. But what we have to be careful is, where it would be useful in a VM scenario is if you have VM sprawl and you've got guys just spinning up VMs left, right and center. What they would then be able to do is if they shut that VM down, that would actually filter through the tiers like normal data would. So it would go to SSD, so it's going to cheaper storage. Eventually it's going to go off to the cloud. So from that point of view, from a virtual machine perspective, it can be actually very useful. From a SQL side of view, as I say, it does support it, but in reality, you need to be very careful that the applications have been developed to fully be aware of cloud integrated storage. Because if you think about a large table which may have records in it that become they're not updated, there is the possibility for part of that database to in effect try and filter down the tiers. So we have to be very careful around service level agreements for that application and the repercussions of extended queries to build in for latency. But it's fully supported, so it is possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Jez. So that appears to be the current question, or the only question at the minute. So if anyone's typing away furiously, I'll just hold the session open for a couple more minutes. But thank you very much for everyone who's joined the call today. Hope that's been of value, and thank you for spending your time with us. If you do have any further questions, then please direct them either directly to Jeremy or myself via the emails on your screen, or if you are already, in contact with SoftwareONE, please go through your SoftwareONE account management team to look at the promotions and incentives that are currently available, and also to see if you've got DPS days, deployment planning services days that you can utilise. Start looking at maybe starting to migrate more things to Azure, or do that analysis and see if there are any candidates that you can start moving to the cloud or looking to consolidate across your estate. We can look into that and see what is available for you from being able to use those deployment planning services days free of charge. There haven't been any further questions, so I'll let everyone go. So thank you all for joining the call. Thank you, Jeremy, for taking us through the session. Look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Thank you very much.